Hello, and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group. My co host, Chip Januszewski, is on vacation this week, but I am joined by Dr. Dennis Reina. Dennis is an expert on generating and maintaining trust. So we're going to talk a lot about that. Dennis, welcome to the show.
Well, it's so great to be here, Eric. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you here. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Well, where should I begin? It actually all began on the walls of Yosemite National Park. When I actually backing up even before that, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, raised on the Jersey Shore, went to school at the University of Maryland. And in 1972, my brother was flying F-4s in Vietnam. As you know, the Vietnam War was raging. My dad was a Navy chief aviation electrician, repair person on aircraft carriers for the Navy, repairing planes. And my younger brother eventually became a captain. But for me, I that was not my path. I
All right.
actually listened to Horace Greeley, and he said, "Go west, young man," and I did. And so I packed up the old VW microbus. This is 1972, and headed west. And I went through the states and Canada, up through Banff and Jasper and Vancouver, and I was traveling down the west coast and landed in San Francisco, staying with a friend of a friend. And he said, you ought to really check out Yosemite National Park. Now, I had hair down the middle of my back at the time, and I said, okay, I'll check it out for the weekend. And well, anyway, one thing led into another. I picked up a hitchhiker at the local youth hostel because that's how we got around. I asked him, "What do you got in your pocket?" He's got $13.56. I said, "That's great. They'll buy us a tank of gas." And we headed into the park. And he got sick, and I put him on a car going back to the city, and I went down into the park. Anyway, a little bit about me is I got to the park. The story will continue, but a little bit about me is I was always intrigued with this thing called trust. And when I got to the park, I my van breaks down, and at the time, this was before credit cards. I had four $20 traveler's checks for credit cards. Well, that wasn't even kind of going to come close to the fact that the van was going to cost me $868. Now, in today's dollars, that's like $6,386 or something like that. I don't know. I looked it up recently, and that's approximately what today's dollar value was. But anyway, so I decided to get a job, and I went to the personnel office on Monday morning, and they said, "So what do you got?" I said, "Well, I got a bachelor's degree from the University of Maryland." And they looked at me and they said, "So what? What else you got?" And I said, "Well, um, I had to dig deep on this one, Eric." And I said, "Well, I was two merit badges away from Eagle Scout before the troop folded." They said, "Good, you're hired. Report to the Mountaineering Center." And for the next 4 years, I learned climbing, I learned cross country skiing. And that began my journey because it was really about on the walls of Yosemite, when you're 1,000 feet in the air and you've got your belay online, what you realize is that you've got his life in your hands, and guess what? Vice versa. He's got your
Oh,
life in his hands. And that's what really started me on my trust journey, literally, viscerally, and kinesthetically. I really knew a lot about trust from a visceral and a kinesthetic standpoint. But after 4 years of Yosemite and leaving that, and then coming back east to Stowe, Vermont, I actually met Johannes von Trapp at a ski show in Vegas, and he invited me back to Stowe. This was now 1976, and I ran his ski touring center for um, 4 years and learned and further established my skills in cross country skiing and taught cross country skiing, and then another 4 years in Bolton Valley, opening up their ski touring center and telemarketing and so forth. And decided back then I was in a relationship and thinking about getting married. So I decided uh, through the urging of my wife to get a real job, And so anyway, and then from there, I went back to school, and it was this thing about trust really was inside me. I mean, I knew it viscerally, I knew it kinesthetically, but I wanted to learn it academically, because I knew I had a very visceral understanding, but I needed to understand what was this thing called trust? Why do people trust? What builds it? How do people trust? How do you expand it, et cetera, et cetera? Anyway, and so I'll keep quiet for a moment so you can be part of the conversation. But that's how I got into trust, and I eventually earned a couple of master's degrees and my doctorate in human and organizational systems, while specializing in the development of trust within work teams. I really wanted to understand, how does trust build? How does trust get broken? And how do we, repair it and rebuild it? And therefore that's taken me on my life's journey and my life's work over the last 34 years, really understanding this trust and writing books about it, and um, whether it be Trust and Betrayal in the Workplace, our flagship book, which we've rewritten 3 times, not because the model was incorrect. Actually, it has withstood the test of time, but it was because we've learned so much over the years and wanted to delve into it deeper, and the different stories and the different ways that it is implemented and practiced in people's lives. And so we've written 3 editions on trust and betrayal in the workplace. We've also, people said, well, how do you rebuild it after it's broken? Because let's face it, Eric, trust will be built and trust will be broken, right? Not because but because we're human, right? And so we went and we devoted a number of years into researching and developing this whole construct around rebuilding trust, and wrote the book Rebuilding Trust in the Workplace. Now, we say workplace, but as you know, the principles are universal. The principles are applicable in all areas of our life, at home, at work, with our co-workers and our colleagues, as well as our friends and our family and our loved ones.
It really is. I mean, it's so important to every aspect of our lives. So, with all of the research you did, and you said your visceral understanding, I mean, let's face it, when you're hanging off of a mountain side of a mountain, trust is important in the people you're climbing with. But
Absolutely.
how, with all that, at its most basic level, how do you define trust?
Well, that's a great question, Eric. So, how we define trust, and whether it be from our visceral understanding to our academic one, we define it in 3 dimensions. There's trust of character. We basically do what we say we're going to do. For example, when you're in communication with a fellow climber, okay, you're on the walls of Yosemite or wherever you're climbing. This brings us to the second, trust of communication. When you say on belay is on, and because you might be up there, you can often see your partner, say, climbing. I'm using that as an example, but sometimes they're over a precipice, they're on a different side of the rock formation where you can't see them, but you can hear them. And so communication, trusted communication is absolutely critical. How we honestly and openly communicate with one another. Do we give each other clues and, hey, you got to be careful for this rock, it's a little slippery here, or, et cetera, et cetera. And then the third type of trust of capability. Do we acknowledge and leverage the skills and abilities of the people we're working with or the people we live with in service to our customers, our clients, or the end result that we want to achieve? So those three dimensions, and of course there are behaviors that load under each, but those three dimensions, trust of character, trust of communication, and trust of capability, are the three dimensions that define how we trust.
So let's say you're meeting somebody for the first time. Maybe you've just been hired in a company. How do you build those capabilities? How do you build that trust?
Well, when someone is hiring you, for example, you got to first and foremost practice trust of character. Now, what is that? That's the starting point of any business relationship. The truth of the matter is, it's the starting point of any relationship. Trust of character deals with, for example, expectations. When somebody's hiring you, they have certain expectations of a task or a job or a function or a role that you will portray and that you will fulfill. And so making sure that you're meeting their expectations as well as your own too, right? Because it's a mutual contract. There's also establishing boundaries, trust of character again, but how well do we practice in our role that we're given? Are we making sure that we're meeting the parameters of the job description, say, or are we carrying out the function of that particular role? And then, of course, if we're in a supervisory role, delegating appropriately. Okay. Do we delegate not, and when we delegate, do we not only give people the authority and the responsibility, but do we give them the resources? How often, maybe from your own experience, Eric, have you been in situations, maybe way back when, maybe recently, where somebody delegated something to you and they said, okay, I want this job done by X date and X time, and you've got the authority, but you had no resources or no time to do it in order, because time is a resource, to carry out the job. So that's important. Also, with trusted character, carrying out mutually or encouraging mutually serving intentions. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that we're in this together. I've got your back, you've got my back. When you're 1,000 feet up in the air on the walls of Yosemite, you better have your belayer's back and he better have yours, right? Same thing. Do we work in a win-win uh, posture or attitude versus I'm in it for myself? Okay. And of course, the fifth behavior under trust to character is keeping agreements. The essence is, do we do what we say we're going to do? Do we keep our promise, deliver as promised? And then, of course, consistency, how consistent we are. Those are the behaviors that contribute to trust of character. And I would say those are foundational if somebody hired you, um, first and foremost, to make sure that you're practicing those behaviors and being strong on your trust of character. The
Yeah,
other one.
I think that goes not just for a job. Those are foundation for any kind of relationship. What I find interesting is you were talking about meeting expectations and being able to do that as part of trust of character, but that also entails communications. Are those expectations being communicated properly? I remember, as an example, I remember back when I was in college, I took a class called humorous writing. And the course description was very specific. This was a writing class. And the first day of class, we get into the classroom, and the professor says, "Yeah, you know where the course description said all you were going to be doing is writing, and this was not a performance class. Yeah, the description lied. Your final exam is going to be a stand-up routine," which of course changed the entire class.
Exactly, exactly. And of course, with trusted communication, first and foremost, was that information shared with you up front
Right.
before you signed up? No, absolutely not. And then was there truth telling in that communication? Probably not so. The second, behavior. And then of course, um, being able to with stand up and of course with real community admitting mistakes. I think that's so important. One time I had a leader that I was working with. He says, Eric, when I admit my mistakes, it does two things. What do you think those are?
Well, it does right there build trust because you're taking accountability for your actions.
Exactly. That's number one. And number two, it gives the other person or people in your sphere of influence permission to admit their
That
mistakes. So so it's a symbiotic relationship, which is very much a part of trust because trust is reciprocal, right? We got to give it to get it. And of course, it's created incrementally, step by step over time. And then there's also, of course, giving and receiving feedback, which is absolutely critical, right? You want to know how you're doing. Even again, keep on using the climbing analogy, but when you're on the walls of Yosemite or anywhere else you're climbing, you've got to give each other feedback. Hey, this crack is really hard and you got to really hold on, or you got to really, because you're not holding on to the rope. That's just in case you fall or slip or you're actually, technical climbing. You're, using your body weight counterbalanced with the cracks or the rock that you're climbing against. You're not climbing with a rope. The only time you're climbing is like with a rope is when you're belaying down. Of course, you're coming down and so forth. And then, of course, maintaining confidentiality. It's how often have we shared something that is near and dear to us, only to have it maybe blabbed all over wherever, all over town. When we held it in confidence with a particular individual, that is not maintaining confidentiality. It's about if somebody honors us with the privilege of holding something in confidence, I am honored and I will take that to my grave. And then, of course, speaking with good purpose is the last behavior for trust of communication. And what do we mean by that? Well, the opposite is gossip and backbiting. So there isn't whispering about, hey, did you know that so and so, blah, blah, blah. None of that. It's really about if you have an issue or concern with someone, that you bring it to them forthright and just say, hey, let's work this out. But I wasn't happy with X or Y or Z. And that's also about giving and receiving feedback too, openly and honestly. So those six behaviors also contribute to trust of communication.
Yeah, I think something else with trust of communication, we talked about admitting when you make a mistake. But I think even before that point, it's important, and we train clients in this all the time. It's important to be able to say, I don't know.
Yes.
None of us knows everything. So
Right.
if somebody asks a question, there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying, you know what, I don't know the answer to that, but I will look into it and get back to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Admitting mistakes is probably one of and can be one of the most powerful, actually, trust builders. It can also break it in a heartbeat if you're trying to cover it because people can see right through that. People
Yep.
can see not speaking authentically and truthfully and so forth. So yes, you're absolutely right. admitting mistakes is a very powerful both trust building or breaking, depending upon which direction you turn.
So, what behaviors are involved with the third characteristic of trust?
Trust of capability is the third, acknowledging people's skills and abilities, allowing them to do the jobs we hire them to do. So how often, versus micromanaging or, telling them not only what to do, but how to do it. And boy, I tell you, that is a sure trust breaker. Another one is giving them or empowering them to make decisions. How often do we go down a road where we're given a task, but we can't make the critical decisions because we have to go to either our boss or somebody that has the authority to grant us the power or permission to make a decision. And making decisions is very empowering in that trust of capability. And then, of course, the third behavior out of four for trust of capability is involving others and seeking their input. For example, Eric, how do you feel when I ask you for your advice?
Yeah, it does not just build trust, but it also builds confidence. It builds positive emotions. It is a very powerful thing to be able to ask somebody, well, what do you think? How would you take a look at this? What is your opinion? Because everybody's got an opinion, and to be able to share it, especially with a peer or somebody that you're answering to, shows that they value your opinion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's an acknowledgement of them and their skills, which is actually even reflects upon the person. One of the things what we found, and this was so intriguing for my bride of 31 years, Dr. Michelle Reina, and I, when we actually met on the dance floor in graduate school. We've been dancing together ever since, involved in the research. She's also been my co-author through all my books and stuff. And what we found is that the behaviors are interrelated. Like, as you clearly pointed out, when I was describing the trust of character ones, they also involve trust of communication. And then trust of communication involves trust of character, trust of capability, excuse me, as the third leg of the stool, so to speak. And then the last one of trust of capability is helping people learn new skills. Do we not only empower them to make decision, acknowledge their skills, but do we help them learn even, if we are in fact going to grow the bench or we are going to help people really develop in their jobs, particularly now more than ever, we have to help them learn new skills and grow in those jobs and process, because otherwise we'll lose them, right? They'll
Absolutely.
check out the door, or worse yet, they stay and become the working wounded. But in this day and age, most people are just walking out the door. So all those behaviors, acknowledging people's skills and abilities, empowering them to make decisions, involving them and seeking their input, and then, of course, helping them learn new skills. Those are those behaviors that contribute to trust of capability, which is the third leg of the stool of what you
Yes.
mean. The long-winded answer to
Right.
your question of what do you mean by trust?
Yeah, trust of capability is so important, especially in business when you're running a company. You need to be able to trust the people you're working with and the people you hire. Back when I was in corporate, we used to joke that the owner of the company that I worked for had this amazing ability to hire brilliant people and then get in the way of them doing their jobs. Yep.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and that's a surefire way for people to check out, to shut down, to or walk out.
Yes.
To walk out and what a loss. It's a loss to the individual because they couldn't express and use their talents in the way they know they could and should have been able to. And then it's a loss to the leader because they lose good people, and it's a loss to the companies in which they work because they're losing good resources, good people walking out the door.
Yes. And that's so important to remember. Trust is not a one-time thing. It affects everything going forward. It is a foundational skill that people need to have.
Absolutely. In fact, picking up on that, absolutely. Trust is foundational to all relationships at work, at home, with our friends, our family, our relatives, our loved ones. Um, it's next week, I'm actually going to go visit my 100-year-old mother. She literally turned 100 in February. And I think that she is holding on because she wants to see me. And I'm going to tell her, Mom, it's okay. You can let go. And I trust that you will be there with Dad because Dad passed years ago. But it trust is in all aspects of our lives. It's foundational and it permeates all aspects of our lives.
It really is. Now, we're coming up on the end of our time. So just one last, if we can go through this fairly quickly. When trust is broken, what are the first steps to rebuilding it?
Well, first and foremost, you have to acknowledge that there is an issue, a concern, a problem, a challenge, or broken trust. Okay. And so observe and acknowledge what has happened. Number one. Number two, there will be feelings that have taken place, feelings on the part of the person maybe that either broke your trust or that you broke their trust. Okay. So allow those feelings to surface. Okay. It's not necessarily bad. It's because when people get emotional about, it's because they care. It's because they are invested in the situation, the circumstance, and they care. Now, the third step on starting to rebuild, restore trust is get and give support. How do you get support? Sometimes it might be stepping back and reflecting. Sometimes it might be writing in a journal. Sometimes it might be going to a coach or a counselor or a friend or a colleague. Sometimes it may be a combination of all those, but bring yourself there to a place where you can then begin to reframe the experience. Now, what do we mean by reframe? Well, what are the choices, the options, the situations that you can now go into? What are the um, places in which you can go from where you were to where you've been? What choices do you have? What options do you have? What circumstances can you choose? And then, fifthly, take responsibility. What's yours to own? What was my role in this situation and what was not my role? Okay. Don't take on more than what is your role, but do honestly reflect and look at what role did you have, and then forgive yourself. So often, you know, uh, forgiveness is a big word and it may take time, but cut yourself some slack. Hey, you were probably doing the best you could at that moment in time, and maybe they caught you off guard and you blurted out something that you didn't mean to, or that you said something or did something and all. Really reflecting and cut yourself some slack, and then if it's appropriate, forgive the other, but we're not necessarily, sometimes that takes a lifetime. Um,
Right.
most most things are hopefully a lot sooner than that. And then, of course, the seventh step is letting go and moving on. Letting go and moving on is really about acknowledging without blame the situations and circumstances you were in, but freeing yourself of the baggage of carrying this with you and dwelling upon it and so forth, and just saying, hey, you know what? Next time I'll do better. Next time. it'll be better. And not to absolve yourself, but just to acknowledge that those 7 steps, observe and acknowledge what's happened, allow your feelings to surface, getting support, reframing the experience, taking responsibility, forgiving yourself and letting go and moving on. All of those you can cycle through again and again and again, depending upon the seriousness and the impact and the intent of the hurt, the letdown, the disappointment, or the betrayal. And sometimes it can be in 2 words. I'm sorry, or maybe that's 3, or I didn't mean it, etc. And let go.
All right. That's some great advice. We are at the end of our time here. So if our listeners want to get more information, if they want to find your books or get information about your programs, how can they do that?
Well, first and foremost, it's www.reinatrustbuilding.com. So that's reinatrustbuilding.com. And that's our website. Also, our books are Trust and Betrayal in the Workplace and Rebuilding Trust in the Workplace. And hopefully soon, there'll be a new one coming out, Trusting Yourself, Your Trust Building Journey, which is the new book that I'm working on. And they can also write me at dsreina@reinatrustbuilding.com. I would love to hear from your listening audience.
Fantastic. And just to clarify, Reina, it's Reina.
Thank you, Eric.
All right. It was great having you here today.
Well, thank you so much, Eric, and I so appreciate both the good work that you're doing and being a guest on your podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch every episode at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.